Books. We've all read them. You might love them and you might hate them. But which books have you read that you would recommend to a friend? And which one would you recommend to your enemy? My name is Syra, and I might not be the most avid reader in the world. In fact, there were a number of years where I didn't read for fun at all. But in the past, I want to say 1.5 to 2 years, I have finally been finding my love of reading again through reading more classics. Namely, these ones and these ones. So I thought it would be fun to go through the books that I have read, and most of them I have loved. So I thought it would be fun to go through the books that I have been reading in the past little while, and I would love to make some recommendations to you, or to someone you despise. I will also say, I have gone out of my way to read mainly books written by women, because I like how women write significantly more than I like how most men write. But obviously there are going to be some exceptions to that rule. The first book I would love to talk about is Northanger Abbey. Pride and Prejudice is probably the book that pops into your mind first when you hear Jane Austen. I want to change that. Now, if you are a Jane Austen fan, you have most definitely read this book before, although it's not the book that I hear talked about the most often. Northanger Abbey is the sole book I credit with bringing back my love of reading. I've read this book 2 or 3 times, probably 3. And every time I've read this book, I have annotated it. When I've given it away to friends to read and borrow, they have also annotated it, and it is such a good book. If you are someone that's maybe a little bit nervous about getting into Jane Austen, I can't recommend this book enough. It reads more like a modern book than a lot of the other Jane Austen books that I have read, and it is completely different in tone from all of the other Jane Austen books. Northanger Abbey is a satire of the Gothic genre. Most specifically, it satirizes this book, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe, and it does it in the most hilarious way possible. The main character of Northanger Abbey is reading The Mysteries of Udolpho and commenting on it throughout the book as it follows similar steps. Isn't that incredible? Oh, I love this book. This is a book about female friendship. Of course, there is a romantic element to it. While it isn't super heavy on actual plot points, the social aspect of the book is what makes it so interesting. There's a really good quote about friendship in here. I wrote at the top of the page, "Good quote on this page." This sentence sort of summarizes a lot to do with this book, a lot of the themes in this book, and it is, "Friendship is certainly the finest balm for the pangs of disappointed love." I'm going to read you the first sentence of this book, and you cannot tell me after hearing it that you're not a little bit intrigued to find out about the main character. Here we go. "No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be a heroine." First off, absolutely brutal, but the whole first page is sort of just piling on this character, being like, she's so average, she's not particularly smart, she's not particularly beautiful, she's just kind of there, but she's nice. I love a nice main character. I'll say it. She is flawed. Her niceness and her naivety are flaws. I love this book. I should also say with this book, there will be a man that you will hate. I have so many notes in this book from when I and my friends have annotated it, talking explicitly about how much we hate this one man. The other man, fantastic. Flawed, yes. Significantly better than the other man. There's always gotta be a bad suitor. Jane Austen's also just hilarious. It's not the same type of humor exactly that you see nowadays, but please give it a try. She is so funny. I laughed out loud while reading this book. I've talked about this book now for 10 minutes. Okay, some of this is going to be cut out. Read this book. I will move things along. To put it into more proper words, I recommend this book to anyone wanting to start their classics journey, to anyone wanting just a book of really girly fun where you're kicking your feet in the air. I love this book. And since that book satirizes Gothics, I figured why not jump into the 2 Gothics that I have read. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Now this is another one of the classics that people are going to be like, everyone's heard of this book. I thought I knew what happened in this book. I was wrong. So many things happen in this book. The imagery of everything is amazing. It's broody, it's dark. You find yourself in this weird tug of war inside your head while you're reading it, because you are reading about some truly despicable characters doing really despicable things, but then the next page in, you're clutching your heart, wishing to take all of their pain away from them. These characters deserve precious little, and yet I want to give them the world. This is such a great Gothic book. Emily Bronte's writing is incredible. It captures the Gothic feel. If you have ever read Edgar Allan Poe, anything by Edgar Allan Poe, and you enjoyed it in any way, shape, or form, chances are you're going to really enjoy this book. I will recommend this book with a warning, though. A lot of the characters have similar names, and some of the characters change their last name through the book. So it is a little bit twisty and turny in terms of you'll need to go back and forth sometimes in the book to figure out which character you are reading about exactly, but you get really used to it eventually, and about halfway through the book, you're fine. It's not a very long book either, so not very much commitment, and it's just so fun! I would recommend this book to Edgar Allan Poe girlies. I would also recommend this to anyone that was really into emo music, any sort of emo music in high school. Third book on the list, Jane Eyre. This is by Charlotte Bronte. This is a book that I have owned since grade 12 when one of my teachers gave it to me as a graduation gift. In the time of owning this book, I tried to read it every year for 5 years before eventually I was in a women's writing university English class, and I had to read this book for the class, and that was the only time I've made it past chapter 9. In my opinion, the first 9 chapters are a real slog. You are just reading about a child being treated absolutely terribly, and any good thing is ripped away from her. I don't want to go into too many spoilers, but in all of my attempts of reading it before I succeeded in reading the book, I made it to the end of chapter 9 before giving up. However, chapter 10, immediately it becomes a very interesting book. So it's about a fourth of the book that you just kind of have to suffer through, in my opinion. And then it's relatively easy sailing from there. As these books are classics, and especially with this book, there are a lot of really bad racial stereotypes. There is anti-Semitism in it, so be mindful of that. Obviously, there's also going to be misogyny as well. Just be mindful of that while you're reading the books. This book is really, really racist at times. It's of the time, or whatever. You're still reading it with a modern lens no matter how hard you try to remove it. The ending is fine. It is a meme. If you follow Sparks Notes on Instagram, you've seen this book get memed to death. I would recommend reading Jane Eyre if you're looking for a similar feeling book to Wuthering Heights. Although, to be totally honest, I didn't enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed Wuthering Heights. I would really recommend reading Wuthering Heights first. I did it in the reverse order. Wuthering Heights is much easier to get into. But yeah, I'd recommend reading it if you're looking for a book similar to Wuthering Heights. I would also recommend reading it if you are someone that just likes being miserable while you read, because this is a pretty miserable book. A lot of bad things happen. Okay, moving on now to another Jane Austen, because I wanted to stick with the Gothics, okay? Jane Austen, here we are. So of course I have read Pride and Prejudice. I've also read Sense and Sensibilities, and I'm partway through Emma at the moment, but those are not part of this. So Pride and Prejudice, obviously it has the famous, I believe it's the opening sentence. Jane Austen does really good with opening lines. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. That really perfectly sets you up for this book. If you want a book that'll make your feet kick, read this book. If you like enemies to lovers, read this book. Is it a slow burn? A little bit. I didn't think I was one for the romance genre at all, but Jane Austen is so witty, and she writes her female characters so well. And I love that Jane Austen just sort of makes most of her men two-dimensional. It's very funny to me. My partner is currently about halfway through the book. He's not been enjoying it as much as I have been. This is another book similar to Northanger Abbey where, in terms of plot points, there aren't a bunch. The enjoyment from the book comes from the social aspect of it all. But it's a lot of girl talk. It talks about social structures. Is it feminist through today's lens? Maybe not. But also I kind of think that it is. I would make the argument that it is. These characters are really, really interesting, and yeah, if you haven't already read this book, what are you doing? Go read it, get cozy, have a cup of tea, and have just the most fun time. It's such a funny, good, heartwarming book. Now on to a, I want to say still well-known book, however, when I went to try to get it from the library, my library didn't have it, so I had to purchase this book. All of these books are books that I have purchased, mostly secondhand. This one was not secondhand. The city that I'm in only had one bookstore that had this in stock. This is Elizabeth von Arnim's The Enchanted April. It's a very, very enjoyable read. Essentially, the plot is that a lower middle class woman in England teams up with 3 other women, and they pool their money together to rent a small medieval castle in Italy for the month of April. These 4 women have not very much in common at all at the start of the book. It's a very interesting character study. All 4 of the women get their moment in the spotlight. You get into their heads. I would say that reading this book, the sentences read like the summer breeze, like a warm breeze is hitting your face. Every sentence is very enjoyable. The imagery is beautiful. It's lush. Just a really lovely, pleasant book. I would recommend The Enchanted April to anyone who is currently struggling to watch new media, like new TV shows, new movies, and finds themselves rewatching things or rereading books that they've already read. I'm someone like that. I get very stressed very easily, and this book was so calming to read. I would also recommend it in this time of year to folks that are getting a little bit blue because of the weather outside. I know I am personally finding the gray weather to be a little bit difficult to deal with. I read this book in the summer, so I felt like I was inhabiting the book in a way. I think reading it in the winter would be really pleasant as well. It transports you. It's an amazing book. Now, an honorable mention is Arabian Nights. It is not an honorable mention for being my favorite book. No. I hate read this book. Arabian Nights is a collection of a lot of different short stories. The back of this version describes it as a newlywed Arabian queen avoids execution by keeping her mistrusting king entertained with her stories. By never finishing a story on the night that she begins telling it, she keeps him on tenterhooks, and by the time she has run out of tales, the king has learned to love and to trust her, so her life is spared. That never comes in at any point in this book, ever. That is never mentioned. That's just kind of what you're expected to bear in mind as you're reading it, is that it's this one woman telling them. So the stories aren't really connected. They can be fairly repetitive. I read Sir Richard Burton's translation of it, and I'll give him props where props are due. Because the original texts are written in a number of different old languages, as far as I know, this is the only translation where it is done by one person, so there is continuity. However, I really didn't like reading this. I didn't find his writing pleasant. It read like a translation, not in a good way. The stories themselves didn't really give me anything. I didn't feel like I learned anything from reading it. It felt like they were stories for the sake of being stories, and I was so excited to read this book. I went into this book wanting to love it. I went into this book wanting to love it the same way I went into Wuthering Heights wanting to love it. I gave it so many chances. It is over 400 pages, and all 400 of them I spent hating this book. And I'm sorry if it is your favorite book out there. Women are portrayed terribly. People of different races are portrayed terribly, of different religions are portrayed terribly. I just really, really didn't like this book. I thought that the newlywed queen would come into telling it more. I would recommend this book to all of my enemies. Anyone who has ever wronged me or I have wronged them, I hope you read this book. I hope you read it, and I hope it takes you months to get through so that you can really enjoy every second of it. And the worst thing is, I've been trying to pawn this book off on people, but they already know that I don't like it, so no one wants to take it from me. This is the only book I will ever mistreat. I don't like that book. I don't have the physical copy of the next book with me, but it is The Picture of Dorian Gray. I will say that I think that book is my favorite book that I have read since getting back into reading. Every sentence of it is enjoyable, it's rich, there's so many themes. Oscar Wilde is a genius. There was one chapter that I really didn't like. There's one chapter in there where it just kind of goes off on a lot of tangents, and it's essentially just an essay about things that have nothing to do with the rest of the book. But other than that, and other than, again, all of the other issues that all of these books have, which is there are issues of racism and misogyny, and there is anti-Semitism in it. And as someone that isn't white, did I have times while reading it where I was like, I really don't like the way Oscar Wilde is writing about people right now? Yes. So bear that in mind. Again, keeping in mind that it is a classic. It is a revolutionary book. The version that I read is not the version that costs a lot of money, where you can see the original manuscript and see all of the things that Oscar Wilde wanted to put in the book but was censored and he wasn't allowed to. But even with the censored version, which is the version that I read, there is so much queer love in it. And it's so open. It's a revolutionary book. It's a revolutionary book. I thought I knew the plot of it. There was still twists in it that had me gasping. I read that book in a day and a half. I couldn't put it down. Every sentence was just a joy to read. I'm someone that likes underlining my favorite lines as I'm reading. I realized I wouldn't be able to do that with that book because I was underlining almost every single sentence on every single page. I really, really recommend it. It does have some heightened language and it does expect you to know some social norms from the time period in which it was written. But if you're willing to put in a little bit of extra work while you're reading it, I can't recommend it enough. And finally, the last one that I will talk about today is not technically a book, but it is another Oscar Wilde, and it is The Importance of Being Earnest. I am lucky enough that I have been in this play 4 different times. I have played Cecily, I have played Jack, and I have played Gwendolyn, and I love this play. The more times I read it, the more I study it, the more I find more things to love about it. There are so many jokes in this. If you are reading it on your own and you don't already know about, societal standards and whatnot, pull up a Sparks Notes, pull up someone's analysis of it as you're reading it, if you feel like doing that. Because every line, almost every single line, is a joke. It's so good. You can't see it on the cover of this version, but The Importance of Being Earnest does have a subtitle, and the subtitle is A Trivial Comedy for Serious People. Oscar Wilde is poking fun at the upper middle class from inside the upper middle class. There's so much queer code in it as well that I didn't pick up on the first couple times that I read the play, and it's only because I worked with a really amazing director that I even figured out some of the stuff in this book. Highly recommend. It's not technically a book, it's a play. So it won't take you very long to read it all. It's in the public domain, so you can find it online. Please read this play if you haven't already. You will giggle, you will laugh. The characters are so well written. There's something in this play for everyone. So truly from the bottom of my heart, I would recommend this play to everyone. If you don't want to read the play, try to find a company putting it on near you. It's hard to mess this play up. It is an exceptionally well-written play. Please read it. So that brings us to the end of the book list. As I said, I have read a couple other books, but they didn't quite make the cut for this video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you around. Have a great time, folks!